Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to the garden. It is a beautiful, quiet morning here. The air still has that crisp, damp scent of early dew, and I've just brewed a fresh pot of chamomile tea. I hope you'll grab a warm cup and join me here in the potting shed. There is something deeply grounding about simply sitting near the plants, feeling the rough texture of terracotta pots, and taking a moment to breathe before we get our hands dirty. It's so lovely to have you here. Today we're talking about a very specific, quiet kind of garden frustration. Have you ever tended to a rose bush that looks like an absolute triumph? Sprawling, intensely green, and thickly covered in lush leaves, but it stubbornly refuses to produce a single flower bud. There is nothing quite like the disappointment of nurturing a plant, watching it grow with incredible vigour, only to realise that the beautiful, fragrant blooms you were dreaming of all winter simply aren't going to arrive. It's very similar to that infamous hydrangea that won't bloom mystery that plagues so many of us in the spring. But I want to reassure you, when a rose builds leaves but abandons its flowers, it isn't broken. It is simply reacting to its environment. By the end of our time together today, you will know exactly how to coax your rose out of this leafy, vegetative state and into a blooming cycle by performing a gentle, step-by-step audit of 5 biological checks. We will solve this mystery together. Before we begin our audit, let's talk about how a rose actually functions. A rose has to choose where to spend its energy. Making a flower requires a massive amount of complex carbohydrates and energy from the sun. If the plant feels it lacks the resources to bloom, it will prioritize survival, which means growing more leaves to capture more light. We have to make the plant feel secure enough to reproduce. Almost all modern roses are grafted, meaning the beautiful flower on top is spliced onto a very hardy root system below. Understanding that graft is vital because it leads us to a very common mistake. Sometimes, if a rose is planted too shallowly in a cold climate, the delicate top part, the part that produces your lovely pink or yellow flowers, actually dies back in the winter. What grows back is the rootstock, often a variety called Dr. Huey. It will grow massive, aggressive 12-foot canes with absolutely no flowers, save for maybe a brief, dark red display once a year. If you suddenly have a giant, thorny beast that never blooms, the rootstock may have taken over. Our first official check is the light audit. Roses are sun lovers. They need a minimum of 6 to 8 hours of direct, unfiltered sunlight to generate the caloric energy required for blooming. If a rose is sitting in partial shade, it operates on a constant energy deficit. It simply won't have the strength to form buds. Now you might be thinking, Mira, my rose has been in this exact spot for 10 years and used to bloom beautifully. This is perfectly normal. It's often due to something we call shade creep in the garden. Shade creep happens so slowly we rarely notice it. That little oak tree you planted nearby a decade ago has grown, and its canopy has expanded, quietly stealing the sunlight your rose relies on. Take a moment this week to just sit with your tea and watch how the sun moves across your rose bed during the day. If you realize the light has dropped to only 3 or 4 hours, the kindest thing you can do is wait for winter dormancy and gently transplant your rose to a brighter, southern-facing home. Next, let's talk about the soil beneath our feet and our second check, nitrogen. To encourage blooming, we actually want fertilizer that is lower in nitrogen and higher in phosphorus. Phosphorus is the energy carrier that helps cells divide and form beautiful little floral buds. But if your rose is planted near a lush green lawn, we often run into trouble. Turf fertilizers are incredibly high in nitrogen. Every time it rains, that nitrogen washes into the rose bed, overstimulating foliar growth at the expense of blooms. You can actually see and feel nitrogen toxicity if you look closely. The leaves will take on an unnatural, bruised emerald colour. They become hypertrophic, oversized, dense, and almost cabbage-like. If you gently touch the foliage, it feels thick and unusually waxy, with deep, rigid veins. The stems themselves feel waterlogged and sappy rather than mature and woody. The plant is intoxicated by nitrogen, creating a gorgeous green bush, but locking out the exact nutrients it needs to initiate a flower cycle. Our third gentle audit involves how and when we prune. It is so easy to get this wrong, so please don't be hard on yourself if you have. The trick is knowing your rose type. If you have a beautiful antique or heirloom rose that only blooms once a summer, it sets its buds on old wood, the canes it grew last year. If you go out in early spring and prune it heavily, you are unknowingly snipping off every single sleeping flower bud. For those once bloomers, we only ever prune them right after their summer show is over. Now, if you have a modern, repeat-blooming rose, the rules change. We actually want to prune these in late winter. If we neglect to prune them, the plant's sap pressure is diffused across hundreds of weak, pencil-thin stems. The plant simply doesn't have the localized energy to support heavy blooms. By clearing out the dead, crossing and spindly wood, we redirect the plant's energy, its apical dominance, into a few strong, thick canes that are fully capable of supporting those heavy, romantic blooms we love so much. Sometimes, a lack of blooms isn't a mistake at all. It is simply a matter of maturity. This brings us to our fourth check: age. In the gardening world, we have a saying for perennial plants: sleep, creep, leap. If your rose is only in its first or second year in the ground, it is still healing. Its hormones are directing all available energy downward, building a robust root system. If we try to force a young plant to bloom with heavy chemical stimulants, we exhaust its carbohydrate reserves. Patience is the best fertilizer here. Our final major check is an audit for environmental stress. Roses are remarkably resilient, but sudden changes, like a late spring frost, a sudden brutal heatwave, or a brief period of drought, can cause the plant to panic. To conserve water and energy, the rose will instinctively abort its developing flower buds. This results in something we call blind shoots. It's the plant's natural defense mechanism, choosing to save its own life rather than expend energy on a flower that might be damaged by the harsh weather. To spot a blind shoot, look at the very tip of a new, vigorous green cane. Instead of tapering into a beautiful swelling teardrop shape where the bud should be, the stem just stops. It ends abruptly in a blunt, withered, microscopic black nub, usually flanked by two confused little leaflets. If you see this, don't worry. Simply take your clean pruners and snip that blind shoot down to the next healthy, outward-facing set of 5 leaves. This breaks the stress response and tells the plant it's safe to start a new bloom cycle. When we get all these little checks right, the light, the nutrients, the pruning, the change is absolutely magical to witness. Healthy new growth emerges not green, but in a striking translucent burgundy or deep plum colour. This is a natural sunscreen the plant produces for its delicate new cells. Soon, you'll see a perfectly swollen, urn-shaped bud. The green sepals tightly clasping it will begin to peel backward, revealing a tightly furled spiral of vibrant petals, waiting for the warmth of the sun to open and release their fragrance. Even the environment around the rose feels different when balance is restored. The soil at the base feels deeply friable and sponge-like, smelling wonderfully of damp, rich humus. And when a gentle afternoon breeze passes through the garden, the heavy, bud-laden canes sway with a slow, pendulum-like momentum. It is a completely different energy than the frantic, lightweight fluttering of a leaf-only bush. It feels established, grounded, and deeply at peace. As we wrap up our checks, I want to touch on 2 quick troubleshooting notes. Sometimes, pest damage mimics stress. If the tip of your stem is completely blackened, curled and crispy, as if scorched by a tiny match, that is likely rose midge damage, not a blind shoot. And if you actually see buds form, but they turn brown and refuse to open, gently peel back the outer petals. If you see microscopic, fast-moving, yellow splinter-like insects, you have thrips. Knowing the difference between an environmental issue and a pest helps us choose the right gentle remedy without unnecessary frustration. I also want to gently dispel a very common gardening myth today. You may have heard that sprinkling Epsom salts around a rose will magically make it bloom. Epsom salt is simply magnesium sulfate. Unless a proper soil test proves your garden is strictly deficient in magnesium, adding it will not force blooms. In fact, adding too much magnesium actually locks out other vital nutrients like calcium and potassium, which the plant desperately needs for healthy cell structure. Stick to gentle, balanced rose food and rich compost instead. Another myth is the idea that a struggling, flowerless plant simply needs more synthetic fertilizer. Roses are very sensitive to soil salinity. Dumping strong fertilizers onto a stressed, non-blooming rose raises the salt levels in the soil. This can reverse the natural flow of moisture, drawing water out of the roots in something we call fertilizer burn. When a plant is struggling to bloom, the answer is rarely more chemicals. The answer is usually found in our gentle audit of its environment, light, and pruning. Gardening is a constant, quiet conversation with nature. We learn, we make mistakes, and we try again next season. It is all part of the beautiful journey. I would absolutely love to hear what is blooming, or perhaps what is stubbornly refusing to bloom, in your garden right now. So please leave a comment below. If you enjoyed our time together, I invite you to subscribe so we can share more cozy garden chats in the future. Take care of yourselves, take care of your plants, and as always, happy growing.